In this solo episode, I want to talk to you about being a creative and lessons learned being a creative. I don't know why this suddenly came to mind, but I think for me, I have learned quite a lot of lessons and I had to reflect on what those lessons were. Let's take you way back when I was probably starting the very first college course I did after I left school. At school, I was into art and design and from a very early age, but I wasn't very good at certain academic like sciences and things like that. So I focused a lot on art and design, and I knew that was the career path for me. So I wanted to get my portfolio ready for a college of my choice, foundation, but unfortunately I didn't have a great school experience throughout. I did enjoy having good friends, but it wasn't always like that. So I needed to focus on something that was going to fulfill me, and art and design was that. So I got my portfolio together, but I went to one of those kind of colleges where you can do like a foundation for 1 year and then you're getting your portfolio ready for going to university or college. And one of the things I wanted to do and improve is art A level. And it was a struggle because I was pushed to the limit. I didn't know because school had a certain way of teaching you, and art and design was very much taught in a totally different method compared to school. So I went to an art college, and it pushed me, and it was really interesting. One of the lessons I learnt was I don't think I was a perfectionist, but it showed me that there were other ways of putting your work together. I remember one art teacher showed me that you have only got one option. You can paint and create with only one medium. And so she put her leather jacket, which is what the model of the object that we needed to create and draw from. And we had to draw her leather jacket on a coat stand. And I was absolutely taken aback because she said, right, everybody, you need to only paint with bottled ink. Black bottled permanent ink. So you can imagine, I was thinking, the first thing that goes in your head, and well, mine anyway at the time was, what do I do with the ink? It's a fountain pen. How do I draw with a fountain pen? Was one thing, and the other thing I was thinking, isn't permanent? Isn't it permanent ink? Isn't it? You can't erase it. You can't change it. You can't. I was panicking slightly, so I thought, okay, and she said, you have to draw this leather jacket on a coat stand with only black permanent bottled ink. So when I was putting the very first mark on my paper to draw the first stroke to create something I didn't know what I was going to create from using permanent black ink, it wasn't easy for me. It was a struggle. If you ever painted or created with bottled ink, try it sometime. It's messy. It doesn't slide across the paper very well. It's not consistent, so there's like blotches. It's some parts of the ink is very thin. It doesn't slide on the paper very well. It's out of control. And if you are a perfectionist, for example, you are going to struggle with this. I didn't think I was a perfectionist, but it made me realize that I had to think another way of drawing and painting that I was used to. So the whole point of this project that I had to do was not just to create work for my portfolio, but I had to make sure that if I was going to use something that wasn't not familiar with, how would I treat it? How would I use it? How would I deal with it? And that was the challenge. Because as soon as I make a mark on that paper, as soon as I draw anything, I had to decide that's it, it's permanent. But then out of the uncertainty of the strokes I put on the paper, the messiness that was not what I wanted to create in my head, didn't come out well on the paper, I had to use that medium in a way and say, no, okay, that's not the way I wanted it to be, but how can I mold it to another shape or another way of creating? And that was the whole point of the exercise, was to make sure that, yes, I can see there was a leather jacket in front of me, but I needed to see how I could play with the shapes, the shading. How can I use the black ink to create light and dark proportion? And it was a challenge. I'm not going to say it was easy, but what I did love about that exercise was that I surprised of what I produced. It did eventually look like a leather jacket. It was draped on a coat stand. Everyone had their own version of this leather jacket. The people who I studied with, they had their own version of, and probably they're questioning themselves of how they were going to create using a permanent medium. And that's what I loved about it, because some people have challenges, some people don't. But for me, it was the first way of thinking differently, thinking that not all art has to be perfect. It doesn't have to go the way you think it goes. And I think that's one of the lessons I've learned, that you create things out of nothing. You are a problem solver. Because as when I was trying to fight against this permanent ink on the paper, I realized that I needed to go with it to see where it took me. If I, and I did, I think a few times I spilt a little bit of the ink onto the paper, but I quickly realized that I could maybe take things away, or I could add things to it, or I can intensify the black ink. So this is an interesting lesson that I learnt as a creative, one of many lessons. I might continue this conversation again in more detail, but about that story, that it is something that I think we need to think about when we're designing, that do we have to make it perfect? Do we have to create something that can be erased, that can be manipulated to the point where it's to the finest, thinnest point of the pencil, or it looks the perfect shade of orange, pink, blue, green? I think we need to take our foot off the pedal a bit when it comes to being designers, and sometimes we're the hardest critics, is ourselves. And after about, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, because it wasn't the easiest project for me to do. As I said, I was surprised that I could achieve something out of something that could potentially have been difficult for me. Yeah, there were many times on that project I wanted to give up. And I think the best thing to do when it comes to things that you're struggling with, especially when you're an artist or designer or an entrepreneur, is to step away from that particular project, look at it at a different angle, maybe pull and draw some inspiration from something that's nothing to do with design. So a few times I was almost going to give up on that, but of course my art teacher wasn't going to allow us to do so. And I think I do still have that leather jacket picture of a leather jacket drawn by myself out of permanent ink. And if you go back to your creative career, you probably find out that you've got some kind of lessons that you've learnt and discovered about yourself. And I've realized that for me, I am determined, and I probably can persevere and get through quite almost anything if I put my mind to it. So that's one of the lessons I've learnt specifically from that project. So tell me, what have you learnt about yourself as a creative? I'd love to know. And I'll speak to you soon. If you like this episode, please give it a like or comment. It does help the podcast to get seen to those who are like-minded like us. So until the next solo episode, I'll speak to you soon.